A middle-aged man who was also well-respected was found dead in his home. All evidence pointed at his wife, a young woman in her mid-30s, who was involved in a triangle of affairs with two other men, her ex-husband and her husband's younger brother, each with a motive to kill, but still no proof. Not until two detectives had gotten involved, and motives, which lay beneath pretense and deceit, were finally uncovered. The deceased in question was John Harrison. He was married to Emily, who was in her mid-30s, and his brother David Harrison lived with them. Emily's loud scream had been heard in the ever-quiet neighborhood, and it was especially surprising, given that it had happened in the dead of the night. Neighbors responded almost immediately, and they found Emily crying uncontrollably. Her clothes stained in blood and holding a framed picture of her husband, who was now deceased. The state of his body suggested his neck had been slit, as blood could be seen gushing from his neck. The furniture was in disarray, which suggested intense struggle and a chaotic situation. Officer Daniel, the officer in charge at the time, had quickly secured the crime scene, with Emily trying to give her account. She claimed she just got back when she met him dead, denying any knowledge whatsoever of what happened to him. However, her story wasn't taken too seriously, as her countenance had suggested otherwise. Her story looked planned, and every move she made seemed premeditated, suggesting she was hiding something. Detective Sarah Miller soon came in for her observations, and from what she saw, this was no forced entry. John was killed by an insider, someone who already had access, as he seemed to have been caught off guard. Emily was now taken aside for a detailed account of what actually transpired. While she gave her account, she needlessly avoided eye contact, and her stories had some irregularities. She claimed to have gone out shopping when she came back to find him dead, which was not consistent with the first story she gave. Earlier on, Detective Reynolds had spoken to neighbors in order to get their account on what transpired, and they reported hearing loud altercations earlier between John and someone else, with no one being able to identify the other person. One thing was for sure: John was not alone that night. At this point, Reynolds and Miller knew this was no ordinary case, and they would need their bird eye if they were going to get any useful information as to what actually transpired. They decided to dig deeper and uncover the mystery. The following day, the investigation process began. They were going to carefully and thoroughly investigate anyone associated with John for the last few days. And this included getting a detailed statement on his whereabouts for the past days. They discovered that on the day of the murder, he had left his office at 5 p.m., which was earlier than normal, and he had the countenance of someone who was distracted at the time. Emily's claim at that time was that she was at the supermarket, but there was no surveillance cameras or witnesses to back her at the time. Although Emily was cooperative, Detective Miller couldn't help but notice her uneasiness and the wave of tension that swept through her. And although her story was the same, she kept observing her phone as though she was expecting a call from someone. Miller had noticed this and made a decision in her head to check her phone records. Detective Reynolds made an attempt at reviewing John's professional life in order to detect possible business rivals, competitors, enemies, or anyone with a motive to get him out of the way. Some were found, but no one had a motive strong enough to warrant death. Detectives soon learned about Emily's past, which involved a previous marriage to a man known as Michael Turner, which ended in a mutual divorce and no extra drama. However, there were claims of infidelity and financial disputes attached to the cause of their shambolic marriage. Although Michael wasn't present in town, he had a daughter in town from another relationship, who he occasionally came back to visit. Detective Sarah Miller decided to pay Michael a visit in order to detect any irregularities which may suggest a motive for murder behind it. Michael was a man with a charming personality, and he lived in a well-to-do apartment on the outskirts of town. When presented with the facts, he was truly shocked at the news and expressed concern. He claimed Emily had called him at the time she discovered John to be dead, and that he advised that she call the police. However, he tried to come in person too, but the place was flooded with police officers, so he held his peace. His story wasn't so convincing to an already suspicious Sarah Miller, who made the decision to place him under surveillance. However, new information was about to come to light. Detective Reynolds had just discovered that David Harrison, John's younger brother, was seen arguing with him days back. David was an attractive young man with a wayward personality. He had always been jealous of his brother, who he was always under the shadow of, probably because he was mostly dependent on him for financial support. This exposed a motive or a reason for murder. He was finally brought in for questioning. He seemed nervous, with his eyes roving around the room, as if to find an escape route should the need present itself. He agreed to arguing with his brother some days ago, but claimed it was only because of money, and the fact that his brother had threatened to cut him off. This led the police to ask where he was at the time of the murder. He claimed to be at a bar, but there was no proof or witness to back that claim. The reaction of the three suspects began to align, and the detectives knew they were in for an interesting case with loads of mystery in it. John and Emily were renowned for their happy marriage life, and this made them deeply loved in their community. However, their perfect marriage began to evidently diminish. John, who had built his real estate company from scratch, was a renowned negotiator, known for his top-notch bargaining prowess and business strategy. However, this gift came at a price, and a costly one at that. His business prowess meant little time for his marriage, and this caused a rift between him and Emily, who was raised as a privileged kid. Emily's previous relationship with Michael was a roller coaster. At first, it was filled with a lot of romance and happiness, then followed by turbulence, which the marriage wasn't able to sail through. Emily had ended it on the ground of infidelity and mismanagement of funds. Michael, on the other hand, accused Emily of possessing exorbitant spending habits which later saw him drain up financially. However, both managed to keep their divorce away from public scrutiny. Michael left town, but never truly cut ties with Emily. John had come into Emily's life almost immediately, offering what she had previously missed in her last relationship, which was stability and peace of mind. The pair didn't waste much time courting and got married within a year. However, she soon started missing the tumultuous nature of her last relationship, which called for unpredictability. David Harrison, who was another important figure in this story, was one with a history of various addictions and many failed ventures and businesses. He was considered the black sheep of the family, with John considered his redeemer, as he constantly bailed him out of situations. This made David dependent and very jealous of his brother. David and Emily were surprisingly fond of each other, mostly finding solace in each other's company and confiding in each other. Emily even usually confided in David about her marital problems. The detectives had discovered this, prompting them to believe there was more involved in their relationship. However, Miller and Reynolds found some significant information that raised their eyebrows. They discovered John had transferred a considerable amount of his assets to Emily's name. This had suggested John was preparing for or anticipating something huge. Whatever it was, the detectives were bent on getting to the root of it. Emily, on the other hand, was involved in making withdrawals in questionable figures, and her spending habits over recent times were really on the high side. It seemed to the detectives that Emily was planning a getaway. Michael Turner, who wasn't so involved in this case, still seemed to have feelings for Emily, and she responded with positivity. They still met each other at strategic locations and specific times, and they had an outward attitude towards each other, which suggested the pair were not romantically over. John was the community hero who everyone loved. Emily, his perfect other half. David, the troublesome brother, and Michael, the ex, whose feelings weren't completely dissolved. But the detectives were about to discover the false nature of each of their appearances as the investigation progressed. Each of the major suspects had either a hidden or an open motive, which could result in the murder of John. John had recently taken a large sum in order to settle some huge debts with Emily, was a catalyst. Despite their financial success, she still managed to put him in huge debts through incessant spending. Emily's supposed motives could be nothing short of the fact that his death would solve her money problems and clear the way for her already intimate connection with David. Michael Turner, on the other hand, who seemed to have not moved on from Emily, may have the motive of bitterness and jealousy towards the fact that John had now replaced him in a relationship where his interest was still fully intact, coupled with his financial instability, which could lead to a conspiracy between him and Emily. David also supposedly had a reason to murder his brother, which ranged from being under his shadow over the years to his dependence on him. And with John threatening to cut him off, he risked being stranded, hence a motive for murder. The detectives, however, did not rule out the possibility of a collaboration between Emily and David, who were in the middle of an affair and a financial crisis. This made them major suspects of a death, which would see both of them benefit immensely. However, new information had just come to light. A certain bartender had called Detective Miller, claiming to remember seeing David and Emily together on the night of the murder, involved in an exchange which suggested an argument or a plan in motion. They were both brought in for interrogation immediately, in which Emily confessed to actually meeting with David, but only to discuss her slowly failing marriage, and not a plan to murder her husband. David, on the other hand, wasn't doing himself any good, as he was becoming unnecessarily defensive when he was interrogated, leaving the detectives extra suspicious about him, even though he reiterated his innocence. Michael Turner's financial instability continued to make him a primary suspect, coupled with his frequent visits to Emily. Some unknown sources had come up with the incentive that John had been involved in diversion of funds and money laundering, using his real estate business as an alibi. The detectives initially pursued its course. However, it led to a dead end and was discovered unfounded, probably in a bid to cause a distraction from the original investigation. Then came another probable distraction, which had some elements of truth in it. It involved a former employee of John, whom he had reportedly fired due to antagonistic reasons. He was also in the habit of threatening John, but after thorough investigations, they were discovered to be empty words caused by mere frustration, with no actions to back them up. However, the turnaround point in this case came up. Detective Reynolds had discovered a hidden text message between Michael and Emily, suggesting the reignition of feelings between them. However, a particular line in the text stood out which read, "We need to act now. John can't find out." This prompted the detectives to now label them as the major suspects. They were immediately confronted with more intensity, but this time separately. And this put an intense pressure over Emily, which prompted her to confess about their affair. But she continued to maintain her stand on no involvement in the murder. Michael also maintained a no involvement story. However, the detectives looked a little more closely at the phone records and discovered a point they had missed. There was a web of calls and messages between the trio of Emily, David, and Michael. This greatly suggested a collaborative effort, and with Emily being involved, the murder plan would have clicked easily as she was an integral part of John's life. They had also discovered a mysterious bank transfer from Emily's account to an offshore account, which suggested her intentions of starting her life afresh somewhere new. The detectives, who at this point felt they had the exact people they were looking for, intensified the interrogation on Emily, who at this point couldn't hold it together anymore and began to confess. She cried out, saying she didn't mean for John's life to end and that she wanted a peaceful way out. Miller, who saw the crack in Emily's defenses, decided to apply all the pressure she could in order to get the full account. Emily finally broke down and confessed. Emily and David had initially planned to leave and start afresh somewhere far away. At this point, the detectives sensed that only David could put emotions aside in order to give a clearer account. So, they decided to invite him in, and they forced him to confess. He initially denied any involvement, but when shown the phone records and the statement Emily had already started, he gave the true account of what actually transpired. On the night of the murder, they had planned to confront John and inform him that his relationship with Emily was over before leaving. But Emily warned that John would never consent to her departure. At this point, the detectives had discovered a large amount sent to Michael's account just after the murder, and they suspected his direct involvement. They decided to invite the trio together and put them through the rigorous process of interrogation. When the facts were put down, Emily was scared, David was nervous, and Michael was defiant. These attributes of all parties suggested that they were all in this together, and a tense atmosphere of confrontation ensued. Detective Miller asked who killed John yet again, and at this point, Emily, who was running with so much emotion, decided to finally give in. She claimed it was supposed to be a mere confrontation, but with John, things got heated, and David lost control, causing him to accidentally end John's life. David at this point was already in a shaky state, as he added that he was attacked by John, and he only reacted in self-defense. Michael's role supposedly was helping them disappear after they had mistakenly killed John. And there, the detectives had their answers. It was supposed to be a mere confrontation. However, John got violent, and David had to react, leading to the accidental death of John. And Michael, like a hero, stepped in to cover up for them. It was a perfect plan that wasn't supposed to go wrong. Finally, weeks of investigation and rigorous interrogation had finally paid off. The community of Willow Creek, which was synonymous with peace and orderliness, was now one in which its courtroom was packed full with eagerness of spectators, waiting to hear the end of the trial of this trio, held for the murder of John Harrison. The prosecution argued that Emily had attempted to use David as an escape route from her toxic relationship with John, which sparked emotions, thereby leading to the murder. They also claimed that the financial instability, coupled with the life insurance policy, was a strong reason to believe they would attempt to kill John in the first place. Emily's attorney tried to paint her as a victim in a wrong marriage, who tried to find her way out, but rather fell prey to unfortunate circumstances due to poor decision-making. David's attorney, on the other hand, had painted him as a victim of family tension, who lived under the shadow of his abusive and controlling brother, in which, when they fell out, tried to attack him. prompting him to defend himself, which then led to the unfortunate event. They argued for self-defense. Michael's case seemed easier than the rest. He was just a victim of circumstances. He had no control whatsoever of the events, and he only tried to be there for a friend. The jury didn't buy this explanation, as they tagged him an accomplice. In the most emotional of testimonies, after the prosecution had given their account, Emily was in tears, claiming she loved John, but only felt like a prisoner when they tried to confront him, and that she never thought it would lead to a case as serious as it was already. David, also in tears, as usual, recounted the experience he had all through the years of being a shadow with John in the limelight, and that in the moment John had attacked him, he only had one thought, which was to protect himself. Michael admitted to making a terrible mistake by trying to help Emily cover the murder case, but that he never really partook in it, and that he was just helping a friend out. He immediately took the blame for his actions. The prosecution in its closing statements argued that although the act may not have been deliberately executed, the events leading to the act were deliberate and premeditated. This included both the affairs and the financial aspects. The defense of David and Emily pleaded for leniency and argued that the case happened as a result of intense emotions running high and low. After days of deliberation, the jury had reached its verdict. David and Emily were found guilty of second-degree murder, while Michael was found guilty of being an accomplice. Emily was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, while David was given a total of 15 years in prison, and Michael, even though not directly involved, was given 5 years in prison. Although justice was finally served, the impact this murder had caused, coupled with the fact that it wasn't something rampant in the area, would enable it to stand the test of time in the minds of those who witnessed it. In the end, this tragic love triangle had led to the heartbreaking loss of a husband. What started as a passionate affair turned into a devastating outcome, leaving us to remember how easily love can turn into sorrow when trust is broken. This sad story reminds us of the dangers of betrayal and the high cost of deceit. If you enjoy our videos, please show some encouragement by giving us a like and commenting your thoughts below. Please do not forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so as not to miss any of our jaw-dropping episodes.